Welcome back to Sky News. At least 49 people have been killed in a terror attack at two mosques in the New Zealand city of Christchurch. Another 20 people have been seriously injured. The alleged gunman live-streamed the attack, sharing the pictures on social media. Witnesses and survivors have spoken of the horror that unfolded just as Friday prayers were getting underway.
I was inside the mosque. I was in the side room. And the Imam had started the sermon, so everybody was settled, and it was very peaceful, calm and quiet, as usually it is. When Imam starts talking, everyone is quiet and it is a pin drop silence. But then suddenly, the shooting started. So it started in the main room, because the shooter must have come through the hallway, and I was in the side room, so I did not see who was shooting, but I saw that some people were running out through my room where I was in. At this stage, I don't know where my wife is. She was in the ladies' room. After the shooting, I tried to go in there to see, but there was no ladies in there. I don't know whether any ladies were shot or not, but the police advised me to quickly get out of the premises, so I did.
And he just came in. He was shooting at Hawk. I don't know. Actually, I haven't seen him because I just lied down under the bench and I'm thinking that if I get out, I'll get shot. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed so I could be alive. But yeah, I was the last guy to come out of the mosque after the shooting stopped. And on the doors, there were a lot of bodies.
After 3-4 minutes, we heard, the firing, and it was from the main entrance of the building. And then everybody just ran toward the back doors just to save themselves. And first we hide behind the cars and, under the cars. And then when we see that firing is still on, we try to, jump the fence. And then we hide the next house to the mosque on this side. And firing was on and on, And one person we saw with us was bullet in a arm. And when firing stopped, I just have a look from over fence. There was one guy changing his, the gun and taking the other one because he parked on this side driveway next to the mosque house, and he just take the gun and then firing started again, And
so you saw someone with a gun changing to another gun?
Yeah, I think I saw that was the guy, but I cannot remember because it was a big tension and fear because my wife and my little 4-year kid was inside. So no news, And
has your family come out safely?
Yes, I just got news from a friend that they have contact with my wife and son. They are safe.
There hasn't been a mass shooting in New Zealand since 1990. Murders are rare, with the country recording its lowest murder rate in over 40 years. Yet today's massacre fits into a worldwide pattern of increasing far-right terrorism. The current political climate and economic instability have both been blamed. But what is behind the changing face of terrorism? Senior analyst at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, Milo Comerford, and Professor of Security Studies at King's College London, Peter Neumann, join me now. Hello to you both, gentlemen. Why are we, Milo Comerford, seeing this rise in prominence of the far right?
Across the world, we're seeing a global increase in far-right violence, particularly in Western countries. It's been a major challenge that security agencies have been dealing with over the last 10 years in particular. And it's rising in tandem with an increase in Islamist extremist violence as well, but it's very separate in the challenge it represents. You mentioned earlier about some of the wider ideas that might be fueling this violence, an increasingly polarized debate politically, particularly about multiculturalism, the role of Muslim minorities within society. These conversations are at fever pitch and this is certainly influencing a more hysterical discussion that may well be fueling some of the violence that we've been seeing happening around the world.
Peter Neumann, you're nodding. To your mind, what is it that's behind this growing threat?
I agree, because everything Milo has said is correct. We've seen a polarization of our societies, of Western societies, and of course on the fringes we've seen these almost spirals of violence, with jihadist attacks inspiring far-right attacks and vice versa. And that's a very dangerous moment in the histories of our countries, and we have to be very careful. On top of that, of course, there's also the emergence of virtual subcultures, where people like the attacker from New Zealand are very active, where they network transnationally, and where they also find the means of disseminating their attacks.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that, Peter Neumann, if that's okay with you, that these virtual subcultures, as you describe them, how difficult is it for the authorities to police those, to track the activity that is going on?
Well, it's easy and it's difficult. It's easy because some of these websites like Reddit or 4chan are quite open and quite anarchic, so anyone can become a member. But they are also quite chaotic. It is very difficult to understand who these people are, how to find them, and of course the most difficult thing is to distinguish between someone who talks a big game and in the end doesn't do anything, and someone else who is perhaps a little bit more quiet and then the next day goes out and carries out an attack. It's incredibly difficult to make these judgment calls.
Milo, we have a document, a rambling document, this manifesto that has been posted by the alleged gunman. What does that tell us about his sources of inspiration?
I think we need to be very careful with this document, first to say, you know, this should be taken with a major pinch of salt. This was something that the attacker himself wanted us to read and to dissect and to disseminate, as very successfully happened today. But I think the main priority that we should see is the nature of the targets of his attack before we get to the manifesto. I think the fact that Muslims were targeted is very relevant and a clear piece of evidence about his ideology. But if you do look at this document, and it is a rambling 70-page document that is very diffuse ideologically, certainly there are far-right elements, there are white supremacist elements, but you also see references to eco-terrorism. You see references to even national socialism and kind of workers' rights. So I think it's worth certainly taking that as a pinch of salt as an overall coherent ideology. But I know that over the coming days, people will be leafing through to see if there's any insight about what might have motivated this violence. And
you talked there about those that he targeted and what that tells him. In this manifesto, he describes non-whites as invaders. He is very anti-Muslim in his rhetoric.
That's right. Yes, certainly Muslims are a major theme throughout this document. He sees the growth of Islam in the West as a threat to European culture and to European civilization, as he frames it. He sees a fundamental contest between Islam and the West. And I think it's worth noting with this ideology as well that this is very similar to the views that the Islamic State themselves have, and Al-Qaeda groups and Salafi jihadist groups. They also see this fundamental tension and this inevitable violence and conflict that exists between the West and Islam. And in many places around the world, we're seeing this race to the bottom where these ideologies are fueling each other and fueling this kind of violence.
One ideology fueling, allegedly, the gunman here was that of Anders Breivik, Peter, and he suggests that he's even been in contact with him.
I would be very skeptical about that. He says he's been communicating with him, but there's no evidence of it, and I don't think it's easy to get, as he says, the blessing for an attack from someone who is in a Norwegian high-security prison. So I don't believe that. What's clear, however, is that Anders Breivik was a major inspiration for him. Even if you look at the formatting of the document, it's exactly the same as Anders Breivik's document from 2011. So he saw him as a hero, as an inspiration. He used media in almost the same way, and he clearly wanted to become someone like him.
Yes, and this use of social media, Milo, posting, live streaming this chilling, horrifying video, pointing his followers to other sources, and also, I suppose, the fact that he is now in custody, that he wasn't killed in a standoff. There is a trial to come, another platform for those ideologies.
Yes, and we saw that with the Breivik case in particular, where that was seen as a platform, his defence in court and so on. It's fair to say that the attacker seemed to be very social media literate. I think he knew exactly what he was doing and how to use the various platforms that Peter has alluded to their maximum effect. With Facebook, he used the live functionality to live stream the attack to his followers. And this is very hard to police from a tech perspective, you know, with however many thousands of live events going out at any given time. It really does show you the challenge that social media companies are facing in policing this kind of content and finding the needle in the haystack, which is the person that's willing to take these views that they express online and take them offline and carry out these kind of heinous attacks. It's a very, very difficult task.
Peter, what about the location of this, New Zealand, which itself potentially chosen to shock?
I'm not entirely sure at this point whether New Zealand is really relevant in this. I've heard, in fact, in the manifesto he writes about how he picked New Zealand at random. He himself was Australian, and he said he'd only recently moved to New Zealand, and he picked that country like it could have been any country. So I wouldn't necessarily attribute too much significance to the location. What's clear is that he was transnationally networked, that he was in touch and in communication with people from a lot of different Western countries, and that he felt that being part of these networks gave him the feeling of being part of a great movement, of doing something significant, and that wherever he carried out his act would have reached his followers all over the world.
Milo Comerford, do you agree with that it could have been everywhere, that this was about reaching followers globally, that this was about spreading that message of discord, ultimately inciting violence between races, wherever they may be?
I absolutely agree with that, and I think it seems from the online evidence that the decision to focus on New Zealand was a relatively late choice. He purported to have become radicalised up to 2 years ago, or his radicalisation to have accelerated after an Islamic State attack in Stockholm, and since then he seems to have narrowed down to New Zealand as a slightly arbitrary choice, but certainly signifying many of the values that he was so vehemently against in terms of multiculturalism, in terms of successful pluralism and integration of minority communities. I think those are certainly relevant factors, but it's certainly transnational in nature. I think we're seeing a major shift across the far right away from a group focused approach to carrying out these kind of acts, and more towards the sort of lone wolf, so-called lone wolf phenomenon that we saw with many Islamic State-inspired attacks, where we are seeing the use of the internet to, rather than to affiliate with specific organisations, to help organise attacks and to be inspired in a more disparate fashion.
OK, Milo Comerford, Peter Neumann, thank you both very much.
Thank you.